Hello and welcome back, most illustrious members of the Detail. I'm your host D, also known as MTF Doom, and today we're gonna dig through the ditches, we're gonna burn through the witches, and we're gonna slam in the back of this card right here. I hope you enjoy. Before we get into it, as always, you can help me grow this channel, reach more cool people to have cool conversations with by subscribing, especially by joining the Discord if you find the soft, relaxing content, the the person who I am and the content that I make enriching, enlightening, endearing. That's not even close to my normal catchphrase, but I've blanked on it all of a sudden. Elucidating, enlightening, enriching. There it is. All right, it was close. You can help by subscribing. Help me hit. Let's shoot for 500. Because that's a very doable, reasonable number. All right. Thank you for listening to this fucking PSA. Okay. Today is a tech lab. What that is it was recommended by Discord users to just go into depth about a card that has kind of more than normal going on. Today's card is Dracula. If you don't know, Dracula is here on screen. 4-0. At the end of the game, discard a card from your hand. This has its power. Let's get into what that means. Okay, so some cards I want to talk about. All right, the thing about Dracula is it is not an on reveal. It is also not an ongoing, but I didn't have room to put Enchantress. So the point is, Dracula is its own set of text. It is text that just exists on a card. It's that weird middle ground of like, Apocalypse can't be an ongoing because like an ongoing has to be on the field for its effect to occur, and this is when it's discarded. So like, Dracula's not an ongoing, although Dracula could kind of be an ongoing. Honestly, Dracula could maybe be ongoing, but it isn't real. The point is, you can't Enchantress Dracula to stop him from discarding something at the end of the game. You can't Cosmo to stop him from discarding because it doesn't happen when he enters. And you can't Shang him except in very, very weird circumstances because he has 0 power until after the game, which includes after a Shang would enter. Barring Shang being put under Invisible Woman, who was our last tech lab card, because Invisible Woman creates all kinds of weird situations, which is why I did her first. So, all that being said, the types of cards you want to play are the obvious ones. Apocalypse, I think everyone knows this one. Other cards that have big stats but downsides, right? Giganto can be pitched to a Dracula if Dracula is in the left lane, but it can also be pitched if he's not. Like, Dracula... Put more simply, I don't know why I said it. I don't know why I said this in this weird reverse legalese. Giganto's limitation does not apply to Dracula, right? And that's a thing we're gonna see in a lot of the strongest Dracula cards. Infinite, if you play something on 5, Infinite's very likely to be the last card left in your hand on 6 because you literally could not play it unless your opponent leeched you. But no one plays leech right now. Same with Destroyer, right? It doesn't destroy everything when you just pitch it to Dracula. I also include things like this. If you can make Dracula a 4/10, like, Dracula does not have to be... Everyone, I think, looks at Dracula as like, oh, if he's not like a 4/14 or a 4... I mean, a 4/20 is pretty fucking nice. I will not deny that getting a 4/20 is pretty cool. But like... a lot of 4 costs that have 10 power have some major downsides, right? So, like, just pitching one of these to a more fair Dracula is totally acceptable, and I think a lot of people overlook that. That, like, just throwing Sentry out there to Dracula to have Dracula be a 4/10 that doesn't give you a void, fine. Totally fine set of circumstances. And then obviously, like, a lot of people play Chavez for this reason, the MODOK. So if you're playing MODOK, you kind of want to guarantee that the last card you draw is worth being a 4 cost. And like a 4/9 is totally fine. Like, so if you Modok on 5 and the last card that you're gonna draw is Chavez, even if you didn't draw Apocalypse to like have discarded him a couple of times, most people are pretty good with Dracula being quote unquote only a 4/9, which is still like a fine stat line, especially with how hard he is to interact with, as we've already kind of covered. The next thing we're going to go into is actually how to interact with him. No, it's not. Let's go into other corner cases. So Typhoid Mary, other cards, your other cards have -1 power. This will, if this is on the field, it will affect Dracula. And normally power additions and reductions don't. Most of them don't. Like, if your opponent has mats while you have Dracula out, it doesn't do anything, right? Because Dracula will get minus power, whatever. Dracula could have -20 fucking power. As soon as the game ends and you pitch something, it becomes that number. It doesn't become that number -10. It just becomes that number. However, Typhoid Mary being on the field will reduce his power. And other things that would increase his base power, right? So, like, if you play Dracula and then play Valkyrie and Drac becomes a 3 power, he will then become whatever he pitches at the end of the game. He won't become that number +3, right? I think that makes sense, because it sets the power to whatever you pitch, which will override this new thing, which is why, like, it'll override the hazmat stuff, but it will not override this because it sets it to that number, and then it will get -1. So it's a little unintuitive. I think it makes sense from like a coding standpoint and from a very legalese, rules lawyery type of standpoint, but I want it to be known that that's the case, just so you don't accidentally catch yourself out thinking that it works one way but it works another way. Another card that I include as a fine pitch is Doc Ock, right? Because like again, a 4/10 is totally fine, but Doc Ock is also here because it's one of the only ways to meaningfully interact. And I say meaningfully, it's still not great. But if your opponent has Dracula, if Dracula somehow became meta, I guess is kind of what I'm saying. The few cards that really can help is Doc Ock, because you can empty your opponent's hand on 6, so that their Dracula, if they thought they were going to pitch an Infinite or something to Dracula, and that's how they were going to win that lane, and they might commit to a different lane, you can be like, okay, Doc Ock, pull everything into the lane that I'm not fighting for, try to win this neutral lane, and then auto win the Dracula lane on the back of them thinking they're going to have way more power than they are. It's not the best solution. I think the best solution is to try to hit him with a Black Widow on turn 6 and 50-50 the Widow Spite. And that's still not a great solution, but it's about as good as we got. Luckily, Dracula has never been like format breaking meta, because those really are the options. It's tough out here for someone who wants to beat Dracula. It's real tough out here. But that's it. That's really, like, that's the long and short of it. He's hard to interact with. He creates very... Oh, there's one more. And most people I think might know this or have noticed this by now. But it's the weird Apocalypse interaction. Okay, say Dracula pitches. Say you haven't discarded Apocalypse at all. You have not once discarded him. He's the base 6/8. He's the last card in your hand on turn 6, and he's just a 6/8. If you discard him to Dracula, Dracula will have 12 power, because it reads the Apocalypse as having the plus power when it gets discarded. It returns... It's weird. It's like it gains the power first and then returns to your hand, which I think is how it works on a coding side. But Dracula will have 12, not 8, unless that has changed very recently. But I was doing some testing with this on stream, and it still worked like that a couple days ago, so I don't think anything changed. But very, very weird to me that that's the case. But you will get 12 power on Dracula. So basically, Apocalypse always counts for 4 more than he looks like he counts when he's in your hand, if he's going to be your pitch to Dracula. So keep that in mind. Very useful info to have. I felt like I had one more thing to talk. Oh, Helicarrier. That's right. So, some people like the... this actually came up very recently in Discord. One of Discord user, a frog in a tent, beat an opponent because they did not consider the opportunity cost of including a certain card. And that card was the Collector, who I can't find. But the Collector's a 2/2 that gets +1 power every time a card... There it is. Whenever a card enters your hand from anywhere except your deck, it gets +1 power, right? So, there are discard decks that run Collector, mostly for the interaction with Swarm, who, when you discard a Swarm, you get 2 copies of it back to your hand that cost 0, and Helicarrier, which is, when you discard it, add 3 random cards to your hand. All of that is really cool. All of it, it's a really cool deck, but it is not the same deck that you play Dracula in, even though there's a bunch of stuff that says discard. And the reason for that, and this happened specifically to one of my users, is that our opponent went discard Helicarrier, get 3 random cards added to your hand, and then at the end of the game, Dracula pitched something. It was a very random pitch because they suddenly had 3 more cards that they had to empty out, and they weren't able to before the game ended. And wouldn't you know it, they pitched a green goblin that Helicarrier had added to their hand, and their Dracula was a 4 energy -3 power card. Not a great play. Not the best play that you've ever seen. So keep that in mind too, that Dracula does not necessarily go in every deck that runs discard cards. If you're going for a discard Swarm deck, you can sometimes have to skip out on the Dracula, especially if there's a certain play pattern. Dracula and Swarm can go together. I guess this is the last thing I want to outline. Dracula and Swarm can totally go together. I should pull up Swarm. But there's a very specific thing to keep in mind, which is that if you're going to discard Swarm multiple times over the course of a game, like you kind of even have it mathed out, like, okay, Colleen is going to discard Swarm once, and then I have like a MODOK. You better math out that you have enough space to play all these Swarms, because otherwise you're going to get stuck with one in your hand at the end of the game, and that Dracula is going to look way worse for it, okay? So just keep that in mind. They can go together. They probably don't go together along with Helicarrier and Collector, but it isn't impossible to make it work. But just keep those types of things in mind, that you have to get the cards out of your hand by the end of the game. You just have to. And so you need the space and the energy and the time to deploy. And if you don't have all those things, Dracula is worse. Now, I know it doesn't feel like that when you're playing against Dracula and every time they hit the 1 in 5 for the 20 Infinite, but it is. They had to make a bunch of choices to get to that position. And while it can feel really bad, a lot of the time you might not even notice that they retreat because their hand looks really awkward with a Dracula. And there's a lot of feel-bad moments. I'm not going to fucking deny it. Dracula creates quite a lot of feel-bad moments, and I think should have maybe one more piece of counterplay somewhere, but I don't really know how they do that without just ruining the card. But just do keep that in mind, especially if you go to start playing it. And I think that this is like a panacea for a lot of things. I mentioned it in yesterday's deck tech for High Evo. Is like, it's really easy to be like, this card's broken, but like, I invite you to try putting a deck together and just being like, oh, actually, hang on. I keep running into these situations where this is really awkward and I don't actually like how this plays, and I keep getting stuck with these cards in my hand. And you could be like, you could be a bad player and be like, I chalk it up to bad luck repeatedly. Or you could be a good player who's like, intellectually honest with themselves and be like, oh, you know what? Actually, there's all this opportunity cost I wasn't considering. There's all these things interacting in ways that end up not working out the way I need them to, and maybe I should make changes and grow as a person and be a better person and join the Discord. All right. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this content elucidating, enlightening, or enriching, as always. I hope that you have a great day, and I will see you all tomorrow.